3.5 years. That's how long I thought I had a real marriage with Scarlett. Patrick's the name, by the way, and if you're here listening to this story, you probably already know how these things tend to go. But trust me, you don't know the half of it yet. It started with the little things. The way she'd suddenly become protective of her phone, angling it away from me when she typed. The mysterious work meetings that seemed to happen more and more frequently in the evenings. The way she'd come home smelling like cologne that definitely wasn't mine, with explanations that always felt just a little too rehearsed. "Oh, it was just drinks with the team again," she'd say, not meeting my eyes as she headed straight for the shower. You know how Mark gets when he's stressed about the quarterly reports. Mark. Her boss. A name that had been coming up in conversation with increasing frequency over the past few months. Always in the context of work, of course. Always professional. Always innocent. But here's the thing about intuition. It's like a smoke alarm. You can ignore it for a while, tell yourself it's just a low battery or burnt toast, but eventually, you have to acknowledge there might actually be a fire. The fire, in my case, was the night I found her bra tucked under the passenger seat of her car. Not thrown there carelessly after a long day at work. Tucked. Hidden. Like someone had been in a hurry to conceal evidence. I stood there in our garage, holding that piece of black lace in my hands, feeling something cold settle in my chest. It wasn't one I recognized. Scarlett had always been practical about lingerie, comfortable cotton, nothing fancy. This was different. This was the kind of thing you wear when you want to impress someone. That night at dinner, I watched her across the table as she talked about her day, animated and cheerful, completely oblivious to the fact that I was studying every word, every gesture, every micro-expression. She looked radiant. Happy in a way I hadn't seen in months. Happy in a way that had nothing to do with me. The next few weeks were torture. I became a detective in my own marriage. Parsing every text message notification. Every late night at the office. Every new piece of clothing that appeared in her wardrobe. The evidence was mounting, but part of me still hoped I was wrong. Part of me wanted to believe that 3.5 years meant something. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in October. Scarlett announced she had another work dinner, some client from out of town that Mark needed her to help entertain. She'd be out late, maybe very late, and I shouldn't wait up. Something in the way she said it, the practiced casualness, the way she avoided looking directly at me while she applied makeup that was far more elaborate than any work dinner required, it all clicked into place. "I think I'll go grab a drink myself tonight," I said, watching her reaction in the bathroom mirror. "Maybe hit up O'Malley's, watch the game." She froze for just a fraction of a second, mascara wand halfway to her lashes. "O'Malley's? Since when do you go to O'Malley's?" "Since tonight, I guess. Need to get out of the house more." The panic in her eyes was brief but unmistakable. O'Malley's was downtown, near the business district. Near the hotels. She finished getting ready in record time and left with a kiss on my cheek that felt like a betrayal in itself. I waited exactly 15 minutes, then got in my car and drove downtown. I found her car in the parking lot behind Murphy's, not O'Malley's, but close enough that my casual mention had rattled her. Through the window, I could see her at a corner booth, but she wasn't with a client. She was with Mark, and they weren't discussing quarterly reports. They were holding hands across the table. She was laughing at something he'd said, the kind of genuine, delighted laugh she used to reserve for me. And when he leaned across to kiss her, she didn't pull away. I sat in my car in that parking lot for 2 hours, watching my marriage die in real time. They left together just before midnight, and like some sort of masochistic sleuth, I followed them. The Marriott downtown. Room 237. Based on the floor I saw them disappear onto through the lobby windows. I drove home and sat in my kitchen until dawn, staring at my wedding ring and trying to figure out what came next. Here's what I didn't do. I didn't bust down the hotel room door. I didn't confront them in the lobby. I didn't drive home and pack her bags, throwing them out on the lawn like some cliché from a bad movie. I didn't even confront her when she slipped into bed at 2:17 a.m., smelling like shower gel and lies. Instead, I did something far more devastating. I started planning. The next morning, Scarlett was back to her normal routine, chattering about her day ahead while she made coffee, acting like she'd spent the previous evening in a boardroom instead of a hotel room. She even complained about how boring the client dinner had been, how she'd barely managed to stay awake through Mark's presentation. The lies came so easily to her. That's what hurt the most, not just the betrayal, but how effortless the deception had become. I went to work that day like nothing had changed, but everything had changed. During my lunch break, I called a lawyer. By the end of the week, I knew exactly where I stood legally, financially, and emotionally. The emotional part was the hardest to navigate. Rage, I could handle. Heartbreak. I could process. But the strange sense of relief that kept washing over me? That was unexpected. Maybe we hadn't been as happy as I'd convinced myself we were. Maybe I'd been ignoring problems that ran deeper than just her infidelity. It was during this period of secret planning that I met Rai. He was a contractor working on the office renovation. One of those guys who seemed to see everything without judging anything. We struck up a conversation during a coffee break, and somehow, I still don't know how he managed to read me so well, he started talking about fresh starts. "You ever think about just disappearing?" he asked. Not looking at me directly, focused on stirring his coffee. Not running away from responsibility or anything like that. Just starting over somewhere nobody knows your story? It was like he could see right through me. Where would someone even go to do something like that? I found myself asking. Rai smiled. "I've got a place up in the mountains. Little trailer on some land I inherited from my grandfather. No neighbors for miles, but it's got everything a man needs. Power, water, internet if you need it for work. Been thinking about finding someone to look after it. Maybe rent it out to the right person." The seed was planted. Over the next month, I became a master of compartmentalization. Days were normal. Work, dinner with Scarlett, evening television, the mundane rhythms of a marriage that looked perfectly fine from the outside. But my evenings belonged to preparation. I quietly moved money into a separate account, little amounts that wouldn't trigger any attention. I researched remote work options with my company. Turns out they were more flexible than I'd ever realized. I even drove up to see Rai's trailer one weekend when Scarlett was at another work retreat that I was now certain involved Mark and probably another hotel room. The trailer was perfect. Rustic but comfortable, surrounded by pine trees and absolute silence. Standing on that little deck, looking out at mountains that stretched to the horizon, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: peace. "What do you think?" Rai asked, joining me on the deck with 2 beers. "I think it might save my life," I said, and I meant it. We shook hands on it that day. I'd take over the trailer in 6 weeks, right after Thanksgiving. That gave me time to arrange everything properly, to make sure my exit was clean and complete. Scarlett, meanwhile, was getting sloppy. The late nights were becoming more frequent, the excuses more elaborate. She started talking about Mark constantly, his insights, his leadership style, his vision for the company. She'd light up when she talked about him, the way she used to light up when she talked about us. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. While she was falling deeper into her affair, I was planning my escape with a precision that would have impressed a military strategist. The hardest part was acting normal. Sitting across from her at dinner, listening to her complain about work stress while knowing she was probably texting Mark under the table. Watching her get ready for her girls' nights that I now knew were cover stories for hotel visits. But I held my tongue, played my part, and counted down the days. The Tuesday before Thanksgiving, Scarlett announced she'd be going on another work trip. A conference in Chicago that would keep her away for 4 days. Mark would be there too, of course. Lots of important meetings, networking opportunities, potential client dinners. Perfect timing. "That's great. Honey," I said, not looking up from my laptop. "I might use the time to get some projects done around the house." She had no idea I was about to become the project. Moving out of your own life is stranger than you might imagine. It's not like moving to a new apartment or a new city. It's like carefully erasing yourself from a story you helped write. Scarlett left for Chicago on a Wednesday morning, kissing me goodbye with the same casual affection she'd shown for months. I waited until her plane was in the air, then I started. First, I loaded my car with the things that mattered. Clothes, my laptop, some books, a few photos from before everything went wrong. It was shocking how little I actually needed, how much of our shared life was just stuff. Rai met me at the house to help with the larger items: my desk, a chair I'd inherited from my father, my coffee maker. He didn't ask questions, just loaded boxes with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood that some departures don't require explanation. The hardest part was deciding what to do about the shared things. Our wedding photos, still displayed prominently in the living room. The couch we'd picked out together during our 2nd year of marriage. The kitchen table where we'd eaten hundreds of meals, where I'd proposed to her 3.5 years ago. I left it all. Let her figure out what to do with the artifacts of our relationship. But I did take my wedding ring. Not to keep. To leave behind with the note I'd been composing in my head for weeks. The note itself was simple. I'm not one for dramatic gestures or lengthy explanations. After hours of drafting different versions in my mind, I settled on something that said everything and nothing. I hope it was worth it. Patrick. I placed it on her pillow, next to my wedding ring, and walked out of our house for the last time. The drive to the mountains took 3 hours. 3 hours to transition from Patrick the husband to Patrick the free man. With every mile that passed, I felt lighter, like I was shedding weight I didn't even know I was carrying. Ry was waiting for me at the trailer with groceries and a bottle of whiskey. "How does it feel?" he asked as we sat on the deck, watching the sunset behind the mountains. "Like I can finally breathe again," I said. And for the first time in months, that was absolutely true. Scarlett's first call came on Friday evening. I was sitting by the fire pit behind the trailer, enjoying the kind of silence you can only find miles away from civilization, when my phone started buzzing. I let it go to voicemail. Then she called again. And again. By Saturday morning, I had 17 missed calls and a voicemail box full of increasingly frantic messages. The first one was confused. "Patrick, where are you? I came home and your stuff is gone. Call me back. This isn't funny." By message 5, confusion had turned to panic. "Patrick, please. I don't understand what's happening. Just call me back. We can talk about whatever's wrong." By message 12, she'd found the note. "I got your message. I know you think you know something, but you don't understand the whole situation. Please, just come home so we can talk." I deleted them all without listening to the rest. The beautiful thing about the mountains is that they put everything in perspective. Up there, surrounded by trees that had been growing for decades and peaks that had been standing for millennia, my marriage drama felt appropriately small. Important to me, certainly, but not important to the universe. I spent that first weekend getting settled, exploring the property, and discovering just how much I'd miss solitude. No television chattering in the background, no schedule to keep, no one to check in with or explain myself to. Just me, the forest, and the gradual realization that I'd been suffocating without even knowing it. Monday morning brought a new challenge. Work. I'd arranged to work remotely, but I hadn't told anyone about the move. As far as my colleagues knew, I was just working from home while my wife was traveling. The transition was smoother than I'd expected. Video calls from my new home office, with mountains visible through the window behind me, actually seemed to impress my coworkers. "Wow, Patrick, where are you calling from? That view is incredible. Just a little getaway spot," I'd say. "Helps me focus." By Tuesday, Scarlett had stopped calling. The silence was almost worse than the constant buzzing had been. It meant she was regrouping, planning her next move. She found me on social media first, sending long messages through Facebook, Instagram, even LinkedIn, all of them variations on the same theme. Confusion, denial, promises that we could work through whatever was wrong. I blocked her on everything. Then she started showing up at my office, only to be told I was working remotely for the week. She called my parents, my brother, my few close friends, trying to figure out where I'd gone. But here's the thing about being a fairly private person. When you disappear, there aren't many people who know enough about your life to help someone find you. The mountains kept me safe, and the distance kept me sane. 3 months passed before she found a way to reach me that I couldn't block. She sent a letter to my office, knowing they'd have to forward it to me eventually. The envelope sat on my kitchen table for 2 days before I opened it. "Patrick," it began. "I know you don't want to hear from me, and I understand why you're angry. But I need you to know that I never meant for any of this to happen. What do you think you know about Mark and me? It's not what it seems." I almost stopped reading right there. The audacity of trying to gaslight me even in a letter was breathtaking. But something made me continue. "I know how it must have looked, but we were just friends until very recently. Yes, we got close. And yes, maybe we crossed some lines. But it wasn't. It wasn't what you think it was." Even her confession was wrapped in lies. "Recently. Some lines. Not what you think." But then, buried in the third paragraph, she finally told the truth. "Okay, I'm lying. I'm lying because I'm scared and I don't know how else to reach you. Yes, Mark and I have been having an affair. Yes, it's been going on for 4 months. Yes, I lied to you every single day, and yes, I knew exactly what I was doing." I sat back in my chair, staring at those words. 4 months. Longer than I'd suspected. And she'd been lying to my face every single day. But the letter wasn't finished. "The thing is, Patrick, I've made the biggest mistake of my life. Mark. He was never serious about me. The day after you left, when everything came out, he ended it. Said he couldn't handle the drama. Couldn't risk his career for someone who was too complicated to be worth it." I found myself almost laughing. Almost. I lost everything, Patrick. My marriage, my lover, my self-respect. And sitting here alone in our house, surrounded by all the things you left behind, I finally understand what I threw away. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. I'm begging for it. The letter went on for 6 more pages, but that was the core of it. She'd gambled our marriage on a man who didn't even want her once the excitement of the secret was gone. I folded the letter up, walked outside, and fed it to the fire pit. But something had changed. Not forgiveness. I was nowhere near ready for that, and might never be. But closure, maybe. The confirmation that my instincts had been right, that my decision to leave had been justified. That night, I slept better than I had in years. Spring came to the mountains like a promise being kept. The snow melted, revealing wildflowers and green grass that made the whole world feel reborn. I'd been living in the trailer for 6 months, and what had started as an escape had become a genuine new life. I'd taken up hiking, exploring trails that led to hidden lakes and overlooks that took your breath away. I'd learned to cook properly, not just survive, but actually create meals I looked forward to eating. I'd read more books in 6 months than I had in the previous 2 years. Most importantly, I'd remembered who I was when I wasn't trying to save a marriage that was already over. That's when Scarlett found me. I was coming back from a morning hike when I saw the car in my driveway, our car, the one she'd been driving the night I followed her to the hotel. My heart rate spiked immediately, that old fight or flight response kicking in even though I was safe, even though I held all the power now. She was sitting on my deck, and when she saw me, she stood up so quickly she nearly knocked over the chair. "Patrick," she said, and her voice was different. Smaller. "I found you." She looked different too. Thinner, tired, like she hadn't been sleeping well. Her hair was shorter, her clothes less polished than I remembered. The confident woman who had lied to me so effortlessly was gone, replaced by someone who looked genuinely broken. "You need to leave," I said, not moving any closer. "I drove 8 hours to get here. Please, just give me 5 minutes. You had 3.5 years. You used that time to cheat on me. We're done here." But she didn't move toward her car. Instead, she sat back down in the chair and started crying. Not the manipulative tears I might have expected, but the kind of raw, ugly crying that comes from somewhere deep and genuine. "My life fell apart, Patrick. Completely fell apart. Mark fired me 2 weeks after you left, said he couldn't handle the situation, that it was better for everyone if I found a new job. But word got around the industry. Nobody wants to hire the woman who had an affair with her boss. I stayed where I was, 20 feet away, listening but not approaching. I had to sell the house. Couldn't afford it on unemployment, and you weren't there to split the mortgage anymore. I'm living in a 1-bedroom apartment across town, working at a temp agency, making less in a month than I used to make in a week." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. I didn't want her back, but I didn't take pleasure in her suffering either. "I know you hate me," she continued. "I know I deserve everything that's happened to me. But I also know that what we had was real, Patrick. For most of our marriage, it was real and it was good, and I threw it away for something that meant nothing." She stayed on my deck for 3 hours. 3 hours of apologies, explanations, and increasingly desperate pleas for a second chance. She told me she'd been going to therapy, that she understood now why she'd made the choices she'd made. She told me she'd learned to be alone, learned to appreciate what she'd lost. She told me she loved me, that she'd never stopped loving me, that the affair had been about her own insecurities and had nothing to do with anything I'd done wrong. And you know what? I believed her. Maybe not every word, but the core of it. I believed that she was sorry, that she understood the magnitude of what she'd done, that she genuinely wanted to make things right, but I also knew it didn't matter. "Scarlett," I said finally, when she'd exhausted herself with words, "do you see this place?" She looked around at the mountains, the forest, the little trailer that had become my sanctuary. "I've never been happier in my life," I continued, "not just because I'm away from you, but because I remember who I am when I'm not trying to fix something that's broken. I don't wake up wondering what you're really doing or who you're really with. I don't come home wondering what mood I'm going to find you in or what crisis I'm going to have to help you navigate. I just live. And it's beautiful." She was quiet for a long time after that. "So there's no chance?" she asked finally. "No possibility that someday, maybe years from now, we could try again?" "No," I said. And the certainty in my own voice surprised me. "There's no chance. What you did wasn't a mistake, Scarlett. It was a choice. You made that choice every day for 4 months. Every morning when you woke up next to me, every evening when you came home from being with him, every night when you kissed me goodnight knowing you'd spent the day betraying everything we'd built together." I sat down in the other chair, far enough away that we weren't close but near enough that I could see her clearly. "You want to know what hurt the most? It wasn't even the sex. It was the lies. The way you could look me in the eye and tell me you loved me while you were planning your next hotel visit. The way you made me feel crazy for noticing that something was wrong. That's not something you do to someone you love, Scarlett. That's something you do to someone you don't respect." She cried harder then, but I felt nothing but a distant sort of sadness. Sadness for what we'd been, sadness for what we'd never be again, but no temptation to comfort her or take back my words. As the sun started to set behind the mountains, Scarlett finally accepted that I wasn't going to change my mind. She stood up, wiped her face, and walked toward her car. I thought that was the end of it. Our final goodbye played out against the backdrop of my new life. But she stopped at the car door and turned back. "I'm moving to Portland next month," she said. "My sister offered me a job at her marketing firm. Fresh start. New city, all that." I nodded. "That sounds like a good idea. The offer's open to you too," she said quietly. "If you ever wanted to try again somewhere new, where nobody knows our story." And there it was, her final play, her last attempt to rewrite our ending. Move away together, start over, pretend the betrayal had never happened. "No," I said, standing up from my chair. "I already have my fresh start." She got in her car then, and I watched her drive away down the mountain road until her taillights disappeared around the curve. I knew I'd never see her again. And I was okay with that. Over the next few weeks, I found myself thinking about that final conversation, about the year and a half of calls and letters and dramatic gestures that had led to those 3 hours on my deck. She'd tried everything: denial, bargaining, pleading, promising, but the one thing she'd never offered was what I'd actually needed. She'd never offered to undo it. She'd never offered to give me back the trust she'd destroyed. She'd never offered to give me back the version of myself that didn't question every late night, every friendly coworker, every moment of happiness that seemed too perfect to be real. Some things, once broken, can't be fixed. Some betrayals are too fundamental to forgive. And some people, when they show you who they really are, deserve to be believed. I've been living in these mountains for 2 years now. I have friends here. Real friends who don't know anything about my marriage or my divorce. I have work that challenges me, hobbies that fulfill me, and peace that I guard carefully. Sometimes, when I'm hiking alone on the trails that have become as familiar as old friends, I think about the man I used to be. The man who would have taken Scarlett back. Who would have convinced himself that love was enough to overcome betrayal. Who would have spent years trying to rebuild something that should never have been broken in the first place. I'm grateful to that man for the choices he made, but I don't miss him. He was too willing to settle for less than he deserved. These days, I know exactly what I'm worth. And I know that sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't fighting for a relationship. It's walking away from one that's already over. If you're listening to this story and you see yourself in it, if you're lying awake at night wondering whether you're crazy for feeling suspicious or foolish for wanting to trust, let me tell you something: trust your instincts. Your peace of mind is worth more than anyone else's comfort with their lies. And if someone breaks your trust in a way that changes who you are, you don't owe them a chance to break it again. You owe yourself the opportunity to find out who you could become without them. The mountains taught me that. And every sunrise I watch from my deck reminds me that some endings are actually beginnings in disguise.